Goed, dan gaan we nu door met het volgende programma-onderdeel. En dat is even anders dan we het met Paul deden. We gaan namelijk kijken naar een presentatie van Birgitte Messerschmidt van de NFPE. Deze presentatie die is van tevoren opgenomen. Na afloop van haar presentatie dan hebben we een live verbinding met haar en dan kunnen we dus alsnog weer die vragen stellen. Dus stel die vooral weer in de chat als jullie die ondertussen hebben en dan gaan wij heel hard ons best doen om die te kunnen beantwoorden. Birgitte Messerschmidt is directeur toegepast onderzoek bij de NFPE. Ze is verantwoordelijk voor de internationale onderzoeksstrategie van de NFPE en geeft leiding aan onderzoeken naar brandproblemen en andere veiligheidskwesties. Ze heeft civiele techniek gevolgd aan de Technische Universiteit van Denemarken en heeft eigenlijk haar hele carrière gewerkt aan brandveiligheidskwesties met een focus op brandveiligheid in de bebouwde omgeving. Ze is betrokken geweest bij testen, onderzoek, standaardisatie en belangenbehartiging en ze heeft talloze artikelen over brandveiligheid gepubliceerd en gepresenteerd. En nu gaat ze voor ons een presentatie geven over leren van branddata en brandonderzoek. Er worden in de VS sinds 40 jaar gegevens over brandincidenten verzameld, van specifieke incidenten, maar ook van trends. Dit maakt het mogelijk om te kunnen leren. Birgitte gaat ons hier veel meer over vertellen. Daar gaan we nu naar kijken en luisteren.
Hi, I'm going to talk to you about learning from fire data and fire research. And instead of just talking to you about the methodologies, etc., that we're using here at NFPA, I'm going to use a specific project that we're just about to finalize called Fire Safety in the United States since 1980, as that is a good example of how we use both data and research at NFPA. So first about NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. We are a global non-profit organization established in 1896, devoted to eliminating death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire, electrical, and related hazards. Our mission is to help save lives and reduce loss with information, knowledge, and passion. And I hope to share with you today my knowledge and passion so that we can work together to save lives. A little bit about me. I started my career almost 27 years ago, oh my God, at the Danish Institute of Fire and Security Technology, where I worked on testing, standards, and research. Then moved on to Rockwool, where I worked for 18 years on standards, research, and public affairs. And during my time at Rockwool, I moved to the United States 20 years ago for personal reasons. And 4 years ago, I got tired of flying back and forth to Europe so much. So instead, decided to start working for NFPA, where I'm lucky to have the role of applied research, director of applied research. And my role there is related to the applied research, fire analysis, and outreach. So I want to start my presentation by this quote from George Santayana about those who fail to learn from mistakes of their predecessors are destined to repeat them. So with this, I'm trying to say we need to learn from the past in order for us to be better in the future, also when it comes to fire safety. And one of the ways we learn from the past is incident data. That is a critical part that we understand what has happened before in the fires that happens every day in every country. What is it that goes on and what is it therefore we can do better in order to improve safety? But also to look at the research that's going on around the world. Research related to fire performance within the buildings of specific products that are prone to start fires, etc. And also fire protection. How's our fire protection systems, whether active or passive, are they working? Where do we need to add more, etc.? But other areas that are not so much thought of often in the fire engineering communities, but are very highly needed, is human behavior. How do people react during a fire, or the behavior we have that actually can put us at higher risks? And also social science. There's a lot going on that affects our fire risk that is related very much to the social science field. So we need to do more there also to understand where people are at risk. So at NFPA, we use several different data sets, and the four that are mentioned here are those that we use the most, but we also look to data, other data sets that we can find from other players. So at NFPA, we're lucky to have a really great data and analytics group that we work closely with in applied research. And those data analytics, they make sure that we have the data set ready to operate with. And we then take those and we do the analytics. We look at the different numbers, and then we look at research that are related to the areas we're studying, putting that together to provide insights to our stakeholders about what can be done differently, what is done great, what is not so great, etc. So a little bit about what those 4 data sets are, because I know that this abbreviation probably doesn't mean much to you. So the first one is NFIRS. That is the National Fire Incident Reporting System. And this comes to us from the US Fire Administration. So this is not a specific NFPA data set. This is actually the US Fire Administration's data set that they will give to anyone who wants it. You just have to write to them and they will send you a DVD with the data set on it. And these are the data that are reported by fire departments to the US Fire Administration. And it provides info on incidents and as well as equipment involved, etc. So it's really, really detailed data sets. We also have some data sets that are unique to NFPA and that we need, especially the first one, the Fire Experience Survey, is critical for us to be able to do our national data estimation methodology. So we use this in combined with the NFIRS data to come up with these numbers of fire incidents in the US. So Fire Experience Survey is a survey of almost 30,000 fire departments that we do annually. The FSI is our fire service inventory, which is a list of US fire departments and their inventory. And FIDO, no, it's not a dog. It is the Fire Incident Data Organization, where we have stored information from significant fire incidents and fires of technical interest worldwide. And it also includes all US firefighter fatalities since 1974, all catastrophic multiple death fires with 5 or more people, 5 or more fatalities, large loss fires, and incidents of special interest. So a really interesting data set that we can use when we want to dive a little bit deeper in some of these fires. So I want to start out with showing the highlight numbers that we have. The fires by incident type in the United States from 1980 to 2019. And as you can see, it looks like a success story, like it looks in a lot of European countries as well. But the number of the fires have gone down over the years, specifically in our home structures and structures in general. But in most areas, or all areas, the number of fires have gone down. If we look at fire deaths, this is also a number that has gone down specifically for structure fires, but also for vehicle fires, not so much for outside fires that doesn't involve structures. But what's also interesting to see here is that most of our fire deaths do come from fires in home structures. They are people dying in their homes. So that is really a big issue that needs to be looked at in more detail. So the study that I'm going to talk to you about here is one where we looked at the fire data that we have and decided to dive into much more detail than we do in our regular reports. And what we wanted to do was to see, well, what has changed over the last 40 years? As we see a change what kind of changes do we see in the numbers, in the data? And as we do, what kind of actions have been taken that could have affected that change? And where in our fire and life safety ecosystem does that fit? So it took a lot of data crunching, and it took a lot of looking at research that is available, and it took assistance from our codes and standards team to put this together. And the framework that we looked at it through was, as I said, the fire and life safety ecosystem, which was introduced by NFPA in 2017. And it's a framework for safety made up of 8 elements that play a critical role in fire, life, and electrical safety. And I provided the email address for you to find more information about this, because unfortunately I don't have time to go into detail, but I just wanted to tell you that the 8 cogs in the safety systems are government responsibility, the development and use of current codes, or in Europe that would often mean regulations and not codes. Use of reference standards, so codes and regulations always call on reference standards, whether it's product standards, test standards, etc. It's important that these are used and used correctly. a general investment in safety, having a skilled workforce, not just the workforce that are installing specific fire protection products, but all of the workforce, our electricians doing things correctly, heating installers, etc. All of those things that can actually have an impact on when fire starts or not. But we can have all the best codes and standards in the world, but if we don't have the compliance with them, and if that's not enforced, it doesn't matter. The safety will still not be there. Having preparedness and an emergency response, extremely important for when the events happen, be prepared for them and have a response to them. And last but not least, an informed public, a public that knows about the risks, that knows about safety, safe behavior, and who also can take actions themselves, both related to politicians if they want more better policies, but also through the way they invest, the way they spend their money on deciding to go for safe products. So informed public is an important part of this fire and life safety ecosystem. So as I said before, we have seen most of our deaths in home fires. So we decided to start looking at the home fires in particular and really zoom in on them and learn from them. And as we look at the home fires, we can see that as with the overall picture, the fire rates, and here I've looked at it per 1,000 population, has really gone down in the last 40 years. You know, it's a significant decrease. And the same if we look at the deaths per million population, this has also significantly decreased since 1980. So really a success story. But what lies beneath this success? That is what we wanted to know. And is it all success, or are there still challenges that we need to look at? So one of the first things we did was looking at the data a little differently. And what we learned from that is that not all homes are created equal. So yes, home fires overall is a very positive story. But if we then look at, well, what is the deaths per 1,000 fires? This picture suddenly changes. So where we've been very good at preventing the fires from getting to a point where people call the fire department. So we either kept them really small or not from happening, or we kept them from happening. When the fires get big enough that people call the fire department, so it becomes what we call a reported fire, then your risk, you know, the deaths from fire, from 1,000 fires, suddenly show a different picture. In apartments, this has gone down. We have less deaths per 1,000 fires in apartments. So if a fire happens in an apartment today, you're less of a risk of dying than you were in 1980. But in 1 and 2 family homes, that number has gone up compared to 1980. Not a lot, but it has. So in a 1 or 2 family home, you're actually at a higher risk today. If a fire gets big enough to be reported to the fire department, you are at a higher risk of dying in that fire than you were 40 years ago. And that is really interesting. So what is it that's going on? Well, first we wanted to look at the impact of fire protection technologies, and especially, of course, in the reduction of the number of fires and thereby the number of fire deaths. What we can see is when we look at the information that we have available on the number of smoke alarms in people's homes, is that this definitely has increased. We have data from 1977, as you can see, up to about 2018. And through the numbers that you see in the blue graph is what we've learned through telephone surveys. And that's not always the most precise, reliable thing, but it's better than nothing. And we could definitely see a significant increase in the use of smoke alarms in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. But also we can see in the reported home fires, when the fire department showed up, they reported, well, was there smoke alarm present? And we can see that number also went up significantly over time. And what we can see is that increase in use of smoke alarms really follows the decrease in the number of fires and fire deaths. So there's no doubt that the introduction of smoke alarms and the code requirements to have smoke alarms is really important and has played a major factor in getting the overall numbers down. Another way to look at it is, again, the death per 1,000 fires and see what happens as we increase the safety layering. So if we look at that, if there's no alarm or automatic extinguishing system present, and these are the average numbers for 2014 to 2018, the deaths per 1,000 fires were 12. As we start with adding safety levels, we start with the battery alarms, we go down. Any type of fire alarm, we go down even more. Upgrading to hardwired alarms, but still no sprinkler system, still no automatic extinguishing, we go down a further notch, all the way down to if we had both hardwired smoke alarms and sprinklers, we have now reduced the deaths per 1,000 fires by 90%. That's significant. And that really shows, how safety layering really can help in reducing the number of fire fatalities. Now, please be aware that these numbers or these rates here are based on presence in reported fires only. They might not always have activated, even in some of these fires, the sprinkler system, etc., but they were present, and even their presence had an impact. So then we wanted to look at taller buildings, and because we wanted to see, well, taller buildings we believed had more requirements to having more fire protection, active as well as passive. And yes, as we looked at a American housing survey from 2011, it was very clearly that find units with sprinklers present, the bigger the building, the taller the building, the higher the percentage of units where we had sprinklers present. So yes, there is no doubt that the taller the building, the higher, the stricter the regulations, the more fire protection measures do we see. So not a surprise to anyone, but that made us zoom in a little bit on some of the numbers here for the residential high-rise buildings. And looking at, when the fire is confined to the room of origin, so it does not spread out of where the fire started and what impact that had. And we can see that has not changed significantly for buildings with sprinklers over the years. It was 97% of fires where sprinklers were present back in the 80s into the 90s, and it's 98% today of those fires were confined to the room of origin. But what's interesting to see is also when it comes to fires where the sprinklers were not present, these numbers only fall to 92% back in the 80s and 90s and then 95% in 2014 to 2018. So clearly showing us that the stricter requirements to compartmentation that is also present in high-rise buildings really was successful in limiting the size of the fire. And then as you add the extra safety layer of sprinklers, that helped confine more fires to the room of origin, which is really what we want to see, especially in these high-rise buildings. But also then looking at the fire deaths and who's affected by these fires, then we start seeing a little bit more of a difference between whether sprinklers were present or not, because we can see that 89% of the deaths in sprinkled high-rise apartments were from fires that did not spread beyond the room of origin. So whereas in unsprinkled high-rise apartments, this was only down to 61%. So we actually saw that more fatalities was caused outside room of origin from these fires without the sprinklers present. So there's no doubt that decrease in fire deaths in high-rise buildings follows an increase also in use of sprinklers. So adding safety layering in this case has paid off. So that is really interesting because we noticed, and so we have added safety layers in high-rise buildings. We also see that for apartment fires, our risk of dying in if case of fire gets big enough to be reported nowadays is going down. But in 1 and 2 family homes where we do not have this kind of safety layering, we don't even have compartmentation to a large extent, if to any extent, we see the risk going up. So those increased code requirements really do pay off. Safety in the built-in safety, it pays off. We can see that from the data. But there is more to fire, as I keep saying, than just the codes and standards and the built-in safety. There's also the people safety. There's the people in the building and what they do. So we started looking at the home fire victims and that in more detail. And I'm going to bring up two groups that I think is of interest here, because one is a success story and one is not. The success story is children 5 years or younger. Back in 1980, there were almost 20% of the fire deaths were children that was 5 years and younger. And over the years up to 2018, now it's only 6% of the fire deaths. It's really gone down. And one of the big reasons for this is actually a regulation imposed back in the 90s to cigarette lighters to make them child resistant. So children couldn't play with and couldn't get the lighters going. That really brought down the number of fires and fire deaths caused by playing with fire, which is often very young children in that situation. So that's really been a success story. We also had a lot of public education directed to children over the years, helping them be more knowledgeable about fire risk, etc. But looking at our older populations of people 65 years and older, they have now gone from approximately a 19% share of the fire deaths to 36%. So that is going up. And that is something we need to keep our eye on. And I'll get back to that. So generally looking at the risk of fire death, what is it that make, in our behavior and people's behavior and our regular life that has an impact? So we've looked to a lot of research from around the world on this. And there's a very clear picture that disability has an impact, poverty, not the least, smoking, not so surprising, rural living, and then living alone. So if you are, unlucky enough to start a fire and maybe you can't help yourself, if you're living alone and with a disability, then you can't get away from the fire. So there's a lot of things here that impacts. And of course, if you have several of these factors, the added effect is also shown. So that is about the victims and behavior. Linked to that is then the causes of home fires. And that is a really interesting story that we have around that. We see this bar, the blue one is the data from 1980 and the yellow one is 2018. And this is a percentage of home fires and home fire deaths that we're comparing between 1980 and 2018. And what is really interesting to see is how cooking has gone from being not one of the leading points in home fires to be the highest one. And the highest percentage of home fires, and also has increased its percentage of home fire deaths. And heating as well, electrical distribution as well has seen a rise in the percentage of home fire deaths over the years. Otherwise, we generally see a reduction over the 40 years. But there's definitely a story there in the cooking. So looking at cooking fires, it's been looked at this specifically in the data from 2014 to 2018, our 5-year average there, and compare them to the 5-year average from 1980 to 1984. It is actually the only major cause that shows more fires and more fire deaths than 40 years ago. Not just a percentage, but more fires, more fire deaths. And cooking is our most everyday thing that we do. And yet, that is still a problem that we have not been able to deal with. Yes, smoking remains the leading cause of home fire deaths nationally in our 5-year averages. But there's a home cooking fire problem that definitely needs to be looked at more. We have not progressed enough on this issue. The role of our furniture is also interesting to look at. Another thing we all have in our houses, and many of you have probably seen the work from UL that showed very clearly the impact of modern furniture compared to what they call legacy furniture on the speed of fire and going to flash over very quickly if in a living room with modern furniture. If we look at the data, it's also really, really interesting to see, because what we see here is that the fire death rate per 1,000 reported home fires in living rooms and bedrooms was twice as high in 2014 to 2018 as it was in 1980 to 1984. So in contrast, the fire death rate per 1,000 reported home fires originating in the kitchen, and again, we're talking the death rate here per 1,000 fires, have fallen to 3 from 4. So even though, kitchen cooking fires, I just said that is where we have the most fires, this is really where we need to do more, our furniture play a role. They're low frequency, high consequence fires, and nowadays 1 of every 12 fires involving our furniture results in death. There's some interesting work there that needs to be done, and there's a lot of discussion going on about furniture flammability, and there should be. Definitely something for us to continue working on. Now, zooming out away from just home fires, we decided to look at, well, how about the catastrophic fires that happens? Has there been a difference in that? And if we look at fires that are in non-vehicle fires, so all other fires than those that happens in vehicles, and we look at fires that are killing 10 or more people, then in the period from 1988 to 2018, there was a total of 65 fires that killed 10 or more people in each fire. And that provided a total of 4,290 fatalities. Now, the deadliest fires were, since 1988, were the terrorist attacks, including the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 and the World Trade Center and Pentagon attack in 2001. The numbers from these fires have not been included in this graph, as otherwise the graph would be so skewed you wouldn't see the result of anything else. But they are not forgotten, trust me. It is something we think about a lot. So this story here, this figure tells us, the story that it tells us a story around those assembly fires that we have, nightclub fires, the thing that happened, ghost ship fire in California that we have labeled as an assembly fire. If you look at those high numbered in events, like in 1990, that was a Happy Land nightclub fire in New York with 87 fatalities. And in 2003, we had the Station nightclub fire in Rhode Island that caused 100 fatalities. And then in 2016, we had the ghost ship fire in California with 36 fatalities. We also had a strange event in 1993, the Waco raid in Texas, which the fire that came from that caused 47 fatalities. So some really significant events you can see here. But other than that, if you look at this picture, we see less and less from manufacturing, process or utility. We see a consistent low impact from home fires. But what's really interesting to see is the increased impact from fires in the wild and urban interface. As you can see, that light green color becomes taller and taller as the years move on. And therefore, looking at the wild and urban interface fires a little bit more in detail, we have a list at NFPA of the costliest fires in the US. And 7 of the 10 of those are fires in the wild and urban interface. And 5 of them happened in 2015 or later. And I'm quite certain it won't be long, and all the top 10s will be WUI fires, because this keeps on happening. So what have we learned in our study here? What has been the big learnings? Well, we can pat ourselves on the back. We've been successful in bringing down the number of fires and fire deaths, no doubt about it. And yes, having a functioning fire and life safety ecosystem is key to this continued success. But our work is far from done, and in some areas has only just begun. Now, as we look through the data and looked at the results and then linked it back to this ecosystem, we could see the most obvious impact from government responsibility, development and use of current codes and standards, and having an informed public. These safety costs kept popping up in our analysis. So these really have the most obvious impact. Doesn't mean that the other ones do not have an impact. No, it just means that then we have to dive a little bit deeper into some of the fires in order to tease out that impact. So we did. And one of the areas that came up a lot is the investing in safety. And this is not just related to that one called investment in safety. It's also related to the code compliance and the skilled workforce, because these all take investments to do. And looking at it in the big events, the nightclub fires are a typical example of lack of code compliance and not investing in fire safety technologies. Again and again, we see this happening all over the world, tragic stories of nightclub fires. But this is also an issue in our everyday tragic home fires that only kill a few people a day. It's many little fires happen that are making up a big number. And some of these fires can be traced back to investment in safety. Something as simple as ensuring that the smoke alarm is operating and has a battery that makes it work, that you maintain the smoke alarm, or replace them when they're end of life and you need to get new ones. It's also about using untrained people to do electrical or heating work. Yes, do it yourself is very popular, but there's some things you shouldn't do yourself. But I also know that that's not always a choice. Poverty, this is one of the areas where poverty plays in. Not everyone can afford getting a certified electrician in to work with them. And last but not least, all homes with inadequate wiring for today's needs. Not everybody invests in updating the home to present codes and standards when they buy an old home. That will take a big investment. So this happens all around. What we also learned, and I've talked about already a little bit, is that we need to focus on our seniors. We see an increasing number of the fire fatalities in percentages among our seniors. And we see more and more seniors are living alone. We see more and more seniors with a high rate of disabilities. And we often see seniors living in older homes. And all of that impacts their risk factor. We need to look at that. We need to study it more. And last but not least, the wildfire problem. Wildfires are getting bigger, the losses are getting bigger, yet we have more and more people living in the wild and urban interface. We cannot fight all those fires, but we can do something to make our wild and urban interface safer. Yes, we've done a lot to try and inform the public, and that's been a good start, but it's not enough. It's time for us to take policy actions. So we have just launched a campaign from NFPA called Outthink Wildfire, where we're pushing for policies that will help us eliminate the problem of losses from wildfires in our wild and urban interface communities. And that was all from me. I hope we've given you an insight into how we use data and research at NFPA through this interesting project, Fire Safety in the US since 1980. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Goed, we zijn weer terug na de presentatie van Birgitte. Gerben van Hal van EFPC is inmiddels ook bij ons aangeschoven. En als het goed is hebben we nu een live verbinding met Birgitte Messerschmidt.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, I unmuted myself. Wow.
Hi Birgitte. First of all, I hope that you're fully awake and had some coffee, because I think it's very early for you now.
It's not too bad. It's 9:30 in the morning, so I've actually been out getting a rowing workout and so on before. So I'm all awake and fresh and ready.
Okay. Well, I didn't hear your answer because the sound here is gone.
Oh, you can't hear me? I can hear you.
Okay, I think we can try it again. So Birgitte, are you fully awake?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Good. No, it's not that early over here. It's about 9:30, so I've been up for a while. Been out rowing in the morning, so I'm good.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation and also for joining us today in this conversation. Gerben, go ahead. Start
Thank you
with
very much,
questions.
Caroline. Thank you. And good morning from my side as well. And thank you for the opportunity to ask you some questions about your interesting presentation. We have looked to your PowerPoint and presentation, and we had a question regarding the deaths per million, which are the degrees is clearly visible. But is there also taken into account the increase in the population?
Yes, it is, because it's the death per million for that year. So it is taken into account how the population has grown as well. So yes, it is.
Okay, thank you for that. And is there perhaps an explanation why the number of deaths per 1,000 reported home fires for 1 or 2 family homes is increased from 7 to 8.5 from the 80s till 2018, although more and more homes have smoke detection?
That is really an interesting finding that we had there, and I believe some of the reasons, major reasons, is number one, modern furniture. Number two, that we are in the US and I think in Europe as well, moving more and more towards a more open design of our homes. So, in old houses, you used to have a lot more doors. You'd be able to close off rooms and so on. Now we have the kitchen, the living room, all open, no doors in between, hallways down into the bedrooms, etc. So we're giving the fire a much better chance to spread fast than we did beforehand, and at the same time feeding it more by the kind of modern furniture, electronics, etc. that we put into our homes. So I believe all of those together play a role.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've also some questions. My name is Leeuw de Witte. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Safety in the Netherlands. We also conduct data and statistics, and not as long as you are doing this, but for the last 10 to 15 years we have some data about home fires and fatalities. And I have a question about this, because in the Netherlands we see that we have around 31 fatalities each year, which, if you look at the inhabitants of the Netherlands, this is around 2 fatalities per million inhabitants. And actually we're now doing a research in Europe where we also look at statistics in different countries. And there we see, for example, that the number is 6 in the United Kingdom, 11 in Sweden. And if I'm right and understood your presentation right, it's around 8 per million in the United States. So my question is, do you have any answers why there is so much difference between these numbers? Because we looked at it and I think I don't really know why this is.
It's a good question, and it's one of those that are a little bit difficult to answer because there's several things playing into this. One of them, not the least, being how we define a fire death. It's not done the same way in every country. So depending on what you count there, your number will be different.
So definition.
As an example, some people will look at people that only died in the fire or at the scene as a fire death, while others will look at those that die within 24 hours, others up to a month, some even up to a year. That is part of the reason for this. And the number from the US that I believe you're comparing to is specifically home fires. So it also depends, of course, on how many other type of fires do you include in this number. I know if you just take the total number of fire deaths from some countries, sometimes they also include vehicle fires and other things. So we're not yet 100% sure what it is we're comparing, and therefore it's really difficult for us to be able to draw conclusions on these differences. So hopefully that's something that this new EU data project will help us answer down the road.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you for this answer. I have another question. In our statistics, we show that there actually are 2 deadly combinations. One is smoking combined with furniture and elderly people. And the other one is actually cooking, clothes and elderly people. I saw in your presentation that also the graph of the elderly people is increasing in fire deaths. Do you have any answers or suggestions why this is happening in the United States?
I think it's exactly the same reasons as what you're seeing as well in the Netherlands. Is that when people age, we do see a larger number of disabilities, difficult mobility, etc., and living alone. All of those factors that are increasing your risk in case of fire. So it's the combination of being alone, not being able to save yourself, maybe having, maybe smoking, etc., or clothes catching fire. It's true, that is a very critical one as well. So a lot of things that lead to higher fire risk seems to be coming together even more for our older population. Also living in older houses. We looked at that, and more elderly people live in older houses, and there you often have kind of problem with the electric systems, etc. So it really is an issue that I believe we need to look more at in the US to truly better understand how we can mitigate it. Because the point that you're making, that people who are very intimate with the ignition source, for instance, you're cooking, your clothes catches on fire, even a sprinkler system most likely will not save your life in that situation. And we even see that some of the people that die in fires, for instance, smoking and dropping whatever cigarette or something in the furniture, might die before the alarm goes off. So there's a lot of things that come together here and create that increased risk for the older population.
Yes, so it's really a combined things together. And actually you're talking about furniture in the furniture discussion is kind of political, especially here in Europe, because in a lot of countries we don't have any rules for it. So still furniture is very unfire safe, as I can say. But if I understood right, in the US you have the California standard, and actually they lowered the standard, in my opinion, because we used to have a cigarette test and the open flame test, but now I think you only have the cigarette test. Is this true? And do you see any other innovations on the furniture environment?
Yes, so furniture is a really critical part of our home fire story, no doubt about it. And yes, they did change the California standard, took away the flaming test, simply because of the concern related to flame retardants, etc. So yeah, it's a very political issue. So are there other things going on? Yes, there is actually a lot of really interesting research going on in this area. Both at NIST and at Underwriters Laboratories have done research looking into other ways of slowing or preventing furniture from catching fire using fire barrier techniques instead of flame retardants. So using almost more mechanical way of preventing the furniture from participating. And NIST has also worked on different test methods in order to show how much the furniture will participate. So there's some interesting work, and if you're interested in it, I would say try and check out both NIST and Underwriters Laboratories. There is definitely stuff going on this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for answering the questions. I look at Gerben. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we have. So there's a question from Erwin Braak. We need to learn from the fires of the past. But how do we get that data unlocked? The fire department has one part and the insurers the other part, and they don't like to share that for competitive reasons. So is there a role by the insurance in your national fire incident reporting system, for instance?
Unfortunately, no, we don't get the data from insurers. We have the same problem as you do with getting data from insurance, is that they're not so happy to share them. And I wish we could find a way so that insurance company could share that wealth of information that they're sitting with and doing it in a way without it, jeopardizing their competitiveness, etc. There is definitely a role to play for insurance. And I just heard last week talking to people in Austria about their data collecting system, where they are getting information from the insurance investigators. That was amazing. What a great opportunity to get more information on the fires. Because one thing is the incident reports that we get from the fire service, and thank you to all the fire service that are doing that. I mean, without that, we wouldn't even have any data. But be able to get those more in-depth investigation data from the insurance company would make the data set so much richer. So it's a matter of us finding a way to cooperating and getting that data incorporated in a way that's acceptable to them. So unfortunately, we have the same problem as you, so I don't have a solution, but it's not something I'm willing to give up on yet, though.
Thank you very much. Another question? Yes?
It's time for a last quick question.
Okay. Then I suggest a question from the audience as well, from Henk-Jan Kooijmans. He is asking about installing extinguishing systems have shown that they are successful in saving lives and buildings. However, only 5% of the building in Europe and the US are protected with an active system. Has there been research on why people don't buy these systems?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it's research but there's definitely several reasons. I mean, one thing is that the home builders have to be willing to install it as they're building the house. And also people need to be aware that investing in safety and their own safety is of great value to them. So it's a tough one. I think it's also lack of regulation. If it was required regulatory, then we know it's going to be installed and we see an effect. That is what we see in the tall buildings. That's what we see in apartment buildings, where we do have requirements in many states to have sprinklers installed. They do get installed and it do impact. So if we had the same kind of regulatory requirement on 1 to 2 family homes, we would see them being installed and people will stop asking questions. It puzzles me that when it comes to our home, we suddenly get more concerned about sometimes more aesthetics than safety. Whereas when we go and buy a car, we would never ask to take out safety features in order to save money. So why aren't we trying to get as safe a home as possible? But regulatory requirements play a role here. So if we could get some more countries in Europe to ask for sprinklers in homes, I think that would be great for fire safety.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a clear message. We have work to do. Birgitte, thank you again for your participation. Very inspiring and valuable. But unfortunately, we now have to end this conversation. So thank you very much and have a nice day.
It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.